Dr. Vasim and I forged our way down a narrow, winding path, the crunch of gravel beneath our boots echoing in the silence. The day was surrendering to dusk, the dying sunlight casting long shadows that danced ominously around us. The air grew colder, filled with an unseen force that prickled our skin with goosebumps and made the hairs on the back of our necks stand at attention. The forest around us started to whisper its secrets, strange noises infiltrating the silence. The strange noises were like nothing we had ever heard before, a cacophony of high-pitched wails and low, guttural growls. Each new sound seemed to slither its way through the underbrush, a serpentine symphony that tugged at the edges of reality, making us question our sanity. Our hearts pounded in our chests, thudding like drums in a rhythm of fear and anticipation. What were these sounds? Was it just the nocturnal wildlife or something more sinister? Our hands clenched tighter around each other, twin lifelines in the encroaching darkness. Our footsteps were the only human noise, a comforting break in the eerie chorus that grew louder and more assertive with every passing second. The path before us twisted and turned, leading us into the forest. Suddenly we stumbled upon a small clearing, a place where the trees stood sentinel-like, their branches arching high overhead like cathedral spires. The atmosphere here was bone-chilling. Each breath we drew was laced with a sense of dread. The sounds were not just louder here, but they seemed to be coming from all directions, an invisible orchestra of the ghastly unknown. Just then, a voice tore through the silence. It was a sound that seemed almost human, but distorted as if speaking underwater. The words were garbled, lost in the echoes that bounced off the tree trunks, leaving us grasping at the shreds of comprehension. The voice ceased as abruptly as it had begun, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. Then a new sound dripped into the silence. Footsteps. They were soft, barely more than a murmur against the carpet of leaves, but distinct, a ghostly promenade that seemed to circle us. Yet despite straining our eyes against the gloom, we saw no one. The path ahead was just as deserted as the one behind us. Still, we heard the footsteps, an auditory phantom that danced around the edge of our fear, taunting and terrifying in equal measure. Fear rooted us to the spot, the unknown whispering its threats in our ears. Yet we still saw no one. We continued on our path, the soft crunch of distressed leaves beneath our worn boots echoing in the stillness of the night. The darkness was heavy, almost suffocating as we navigated through the dense cover of trees. Seeing a light ahead, a beacon of hope in the face of the unending black enveloping us, we took a collective breath. It was faint, just a glimmer really. It served as a promise of something other than the oppressive gloom surrounding us. We thought someone was approaching, perhaps another lost soul like us, guided by the flickering flame of a torch. Our hearts beat in unison, the rhythmic thumping matching the cadence of our steps as we moved towards the elusive luminescence. Anticipation hung in the air, mixing with the chill of the night and the earthy smell of decaying leaves. However, just as quickly as it had appeared, the light vanished. It was eaten by the darkness, a light meal for the insatiable, never-ending, pitch-black night. In the echoing silence, we heard footsteps again. They were different from ours, lighter, almost ethereal. The sound seemed to bounce off the trees, creating a symphony of spectral steps that sent shivers down our spines. Suddenly, out of the darkness, we saw a figure. It was nebulous, a shadowy outline barely visible against the moonless night. Yet its presence was undeniable, almost tangible. Squinted our eyes, trying to discern what or who it was, straining our senses to breaking point. For a fleeting moment, we thought it was a ghost or spirit, a lingering remnant of a distant past forever bound to the forest. The figure seemed to sway, a wisp of spectral energy dancing in the dark. Fear gripped us, but also a morbid curiosity. We squinted, straining our eyes to catch a glimpse of the transient apparition. Suddenly it disappeared, swallowed by the darkness like the light air grew colder, and we were left standing in the heart of the blackened forest. Then, a noise broke the silence. It was strange and unearthly, a sound that seemed to emerge from the bowels of the earth and echo among the skeletal trees. It sounded like someone was laughing at us, a chilling, hollow laughter that resonated through the forest. The wind seemed to carry the laughter on its back, spreading it through the rustling leaves, till it seemed like the whole forest was alive with an ominous smirk. We looked at each other, our faces pale and eyes wide, wondering what kind of eerie ordeal we had walked into. Yet we continued on, the echo of the laughter following us, a reminder of the fear we had felt and the enigma we had encountered. Afreen went to the old tomb, unaware he was being followed. As he moved through the dense underbrush, the sound of his footsteps muffled by the soft earth, a sense of unease grew within him. He felt the weight of unseen eyes, watching his every move. The air grew colder as he approached the clearing where the tomb stood, its ancient stones covered in moss and ivy. Suddenly, from the shadowy edges of the forest, a group of mysterious figures emerged. They moved silently, their forms barely distinguishable, except for the long branches they carried, which swayed eerily in the gentle wind. The branches seemed almost alive, twisting and turning as if with a mind of their own. Afrin stopped in his tracks, his heart pounding in his chest as he watched the figures draw nearer. The silence of the forest was soon broken by the sound of distant voices. News of the old tomb's discovery had spread quickly through the nearby village, and now curious onlookers began to gather the edges of the clearing. They whispered among themselves, speculating about the history of the tomb and the secrets it might hold. As the crowd grew, Afrin turned his attention back to the tomb itself. He noticed a stone slab at the entrance, partially hidden under a pile of fallen leaves. He brushed the leaves aside, revealing the name Madhur engraved on the stone. The letters were worn and faded, barely legible after centuries of exposure to the elements. Determined to learn more, Afrin stepped closer to the tomb. Without warning, the ground beneath him gave way and he fell into a hidden pit. Dust and debris filled the air as he landed with a thud at the bottom of the pit. It was dark and cold and he struggled to orient himself. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, Afrin noticed something unexpected. In of the pit, there was a small pile of food, fruits and bread, seemingly fresh. Puzzled by its presence, he picked up the food and climbed out of the pit, his limbs aching from the fall. When he emerged from the pit, he was met by the sight of a small child standing at the edge of the clearing, tears streaming down her face. The crowd had drawn her attention, and she had become separated from her parents. Seeing her distress, Afrin approached gently and offered her the food he had found. As she took it, her tears subsided and a small, grateful smile appeared on her face. Afrin fell into a pit, found food and gave it to a child who stopped crying. We were stuck in a room, and the child's voice came from the walls, shocking us. The atmosphere was thick with dust, and the dim light from the single bulb overhead flickered sporadically. The voice, a faint, melodic whisper, seemed to echo off the old, peeling wallpaper, giving us chills. As we stood frozen, trying to pinpoint where it could be emanating from, the voice abruptly stopped. In the sudden silence, the sound of footsteps creeping closer sent a wave of panic through us. The steps were uneven, heavy, dragging along the old wooden floorboards which creaked under the weight. Someone among us, the oldest perhaps, with a raspy voice tainted by years of smoking, whispered urgently, "We need to leave now!" His eyes darted to the dusty, cobwebbed windows as he spoke, scanning for any signs of movement outside. "There's trouble if we're caught here," he added, a tremor of fear unmistakable in his voice. His hands were shaking as he tugged at his worn coat, ready to make a run for it. But there was a moment's hesitation in the group, a collective second-guessing. The voice of the child had sounded so desperate, so real. Could we really leave someone so young behind, potentially in danger, and all alone? The debate was intense, voices raised in whispered shouts as the fear of getting caught clashed with a deeper fear of abandoning an innocent. Arguments were made, some selfish, others selfless. "What if it's a trap?" one contested. "What could a child do here alone? It doesn't make sense." Another countered, "But what if it isn't? What if the child needs us?" The whispers around us seemed to grow louder, almost as if the walls themselves were urging us to decide. The moral dilemma tormented each of us, pulling at the threads of our conscience. After what seemed like an eternity, we reached a consensus. We would search for the child, but cautiously, ready to flee at the slightest hint of danger. With our hearts pounding in our chests, we moved slowly towards where we thought the voice had come from, each step heavier than the last. We debated taking the child, fearing difficulties either way. The child, named 70, had changed beyond recognition. They had beautiful eyes but wouldn't respond. At 12, they started speaking, saying they weren't afraid. At 14, they became stubborn, refusing to listen or sit with anyone. One day, they said someone else had come, and they started running around the room saying something we couldn't understand. They stopped and we heard footsteps, thinking someone was coming towards us, but we saw no one.